Hey everyone, it's Stacey. Today we're going to be making this full pumpkin table runner, and I'm really excited to be doing this project this week because I did promise it to one of my subscribers who asked me to do another table runner. But first, let's see who wins the So Sampler box for this month. So I've got all the names in here of everyone that entered, plus an extra entry for my lovely ladies who joined me for the live chat. So, and the winner is Patty Taylor. Congratulations, Patty. Please send me an email. You can do that via my emails that you get each week, and send me your address and I'll make sure I pop it in the post to you tomorrow. Thank you so much everyone for entering. Now let's get on to making our fall pumpkin table runner. What we're going to do is we're going to be making half square triangles, which is a new technique for us. And then we're going to be cutting a whole lot of 2.5 inch squares to make up our pumpkins. We're going to use darker fabrics for the pumpkins and lighter fabrics for all the borders. So let's get going. So today we're going to start with making half square triangles, and they're going to be for the corners of our pumpkins. What we're going to do is we're going to make 4 at a time, and we need 12 in total for our table runner. This is my placemat here, but I just have it here to show you the pumpkins. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make up 3 sets, each with a different fabric, so that I can have my corners all random. So for each set I've cut 4-inch squares, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the right sides together, line up the edges and the corners, and if you want you could use a pin just to hold it all in place. And then I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2. I'm using my 1/4 inch foot, and what I want to do is I want to do a really scant 1/4 inch. So I don't want to do a generous one. I'm going to do a scant one, which is a few threads off a 1/4 inch. If you get stuck with this, one little trick you can do is move your needle over slightly so you're getting that scant 1/4 inch. And then what we're going to do is just sew around the entire edge of our square. So pop my foot down. I'm going to start off the edge of it. And then I'm going to come right off the edge. I'm going to lift my foot up, pull the threads. I'm not going to cut them, and then I'm going to put it under, start off the edge again, and sew right to the very end. Coming right off the edge, lifting my foot up, pulling the thread, tucking it back under, and then sewing to the very end again. And repeating on the last side. Coming right off the edge, and then I'll cut those threads, remove the pin, and now we're going to cut it. One thing I forgot to mention was I used one dark fabric for my pumpkin and one light fabric for the border. And now what we're going to do is we're going to cut it from corner to corner on both sides. So I'm just going to take my ruler, line it up on the corner and line it up on the corner here, and then cut. And if you've got a rotating mat, that's when they come in handy right now, but I'm just going to turn mine. Just push it back into place, and then I'm going to put my ruler on top and cut it this way now. So lining up the corners. Now I've got 4 pieces, let's give them a press. So now I'm going to take one of my triangles, open it up, and we're going to press the seams towards the dark fabric. So I'm going to give it a finger press and then a press. So now that's ready to trim those edges. We just have to be extra careful of half square triangles when we've made them by 4s, because we're cutting on the bias. That means that the grain is running this way, and usually when we're cutting fabric it's running parallel to how we're cutting it. So these edges are extra sensitive, so just handle them with great care. So now I'm just going to cut these little edges off, and we can also use the ruler now just to check that they are measuring 2.5 inches square, and this one's looking perfect to me. I'm just going to cut this little triangle off here. And then I'll do it on the other side, and we can check the measurement on that side too, because we need them to be square. And mine's measuring 2.5 perfectly. If yours isn't, you could give it a little trim. They are a bit tricky to do at first, so you might want to have a practice run with some scrap fabric. So now I've finished this one, I'll cut the other 3, and then I'm going to make 2 more sets up with random fabrics. So now I've cut a whole lot of 2.5-inch squares. I've cut them in the darker fabrics for my pumpkin and then the lighter fabrics for my border. And then what I've done is I've made 1 column here with 5 squares going down with my lighter colours, and then I've got my column here with 1 light colour, a corner, 2 solid colours for the pumpkin and another corner. Then we do light again, 4 solid colours. I've got the most dark fabric I have at the top for the stalk, then 4 solid colours again, a light colour at the top, 4 solid colours, a light at the top, and then I've got another corner or my half square triangle, 2 solids and another half square triangle. And just remember to place them so they are making the shape of the pumpkin. We don't want to accidentally have them facing around the wrong way. They're meant to be rounding off our pumpkins. And then I just had a little play that I liked how they were all sitting and I wanted them to be random, and I've just used my scrap fabric here. You might recognize some of the fabrics from other projects I've done. And now what I'm going to do is sew them together with chain piecing. Sorry if that was a bit confusing, but over on my website I will have a diagram showing you exactly how to lay them out. So the first thing we're going to do is take this second column and fold it over onto the first column. And then we'll take the top one and we're going to line up those edges. If you'd like to, you could pin, and then we're going to sew down that edge. So I've got my first 2 pieces here, and I'm going to sew on the right hand side using a 1/4 inch foot, and I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2. I'm going to start right off the edge. And then sew right off the edge, sew a little bit to get a bit of space in between. Then I'm going to take my second set, line up those edges and sew on the right hand side, and I'll repeat until I've sewn that whole column together. And then I'll cut my threads when I've sewn the last set on from that column. Then I'm going to come up to the top, open it up, and on the right hand piece I'm going to take the top piece from the 3rd column and place that on top, and sewing again on the right hand side. Coming right off the edge again, sewing a little bit. Then I'll find my second piece, open it up, take the next piece, folding it on top, lining up those edges and sewing on the right hand side, and I'll repeat that process until I've sewn all the pieces together. So I've got my pumpkin here and the threads are keeping it all together. You can see if I give it a little tug. And now what we want to do is make sure that our seams are sitting correctly so we can nest them. So I want this first column to go up, this down, this one up, this one down, and this one up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to finger press it, make sure that seam's facing up, and press. And I'll do that for every single seam on this column. You can feel if they're sitting the right way pretty quickly. Then I'll just give that a press. Now if that one's going up, this one has to be coming down. And then this one up, and then I'll repeat that process with them alternating between up and down for each of the columns. So now I've pressed all my seams. I'm going to take the first 2 rows, take this first one, fold it on top of the second, and then I'm going to line up the edges and nest my seams. So when I say I'm nesting my seams, I'm taking the fold here, the fabric comes around and folds, and on this side the fabric comes around and folds. I'm pushing those 2 folds together so they can't go any further, and that locks them into place. Then I'm going to pop a pin in to keep it in place, and if you'd like you could do a pin on either side. I'll come along and I'll find the next seam and do exactly the same thing. And then the next seam. Until I've pinned all the seams together, nesting all those seams and making sure these edges are lined up. Okay, and now I'm just going to sew that seam together. I've still got my 1/4 inch foot on and I'm stitching at stitch length 2. And I am just making sure that those seams are sitting nicely. So these seams are currently facing up, and I'm making sure that when I sew them, that's how they're going to sit. Then I'm going to open that up, find my next column, fold that on top, line up all the edges, nest the seams, pin and sew, and I'll repeat that until all the rows are sewn together. So now I'm just going to give it a press, and I want to make sure all those seams underneath are facing downwards. So I'll just feel that they're sitting the correct way, give it a finger press and press. So now I've finished that piece and I pressed all the seams coming down. Now what I want you to do is do a second one exactly the same, except when you come to that final pressing, press those seams up, and then we'll make one more, except this time we're going to have one border column on the left and also on the right, because this is going to be our far right piece. And when you're pressing those seams, let's press them all down again. And then when you've done that, we're going to sew them all together. So this piece with 2 sides on it is the far right piece. And then these pieces, it doesn't matter which order you put them in, but we'll have 3 pumpkins in a row. So I've sewn the 3 pieces together and given it a good press, cut off the loose threads, and now I'm just going to square up the topper. So I'm just going to line up my ruler on the edge and just cut off some of those raggedy edges that are popping out there. Okay, and then once I've done the best I can, now let's baste it. So now we're going to sandwich our table runner, and I've got my backing here and I gave it a good press, and I've got the right side facing down onto my table. Then I've got my batting, and then I've got my topper on top. I've smoothed it all out, and I've got a clearance of at least 2 inches all the way around, because we are going to be using our backing as our binding. We're going to be doing the self-binding technique. So once it's all smoothed out nicely, I'm just going to pop in a few pins to keep it in place when we're quilting it. And I'm not going to use too many. It's not very big, it's just enough to stop it moving around. Oh, that one's a bit blunt, so I'm going to just close that one up and pop that one in the bin. Just remember, when you are putting your pins in, just have a think about how you plan to quilt it. I know I'm going to do stitch in the ditch, but you might want to quilt around the shape of your pumpkin, around the outer edge and the inner edge, or whatever else you can think of. So just place your pins where they're not going to get in the way. So now I'm going to quilt it, and I'm going to do stitch in the ditch along every single seam. So I'm going to start in the middle, and I'm going to go out, and then I'll come back to this side and go to the left, and then I'll do a cross. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down on the seam, and I'm going to stop about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, turn and come along the edge of this edge here, and then go up again, because I don't want to do lots of stopping and starting, because you will see the quilting from underneath, because we're not going to be doing traditional binding. Also, we need to make sure we don't come to the very edge, because we want to be able to trim off this excess batting, and it gets really hard if we've come too close to the edge. So I'll go about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. I'll just do it by eye. Okay, so I'm starting about 1/8 of an inch in. I will do a back stitch. I'm going to stitch the stitch length 2.5, and I do have my walking foot on. Remembering you could do any design you want. You might be wanting to go diagonally along, you might have your own little pattern. It's entirely up to you. And then just when I get to the edge there, I'm not going all the way down, I'm going to turn. Stitch along that edge. And then come back up. Okay, so I've finished quilting and I've cut all my loose threads and given it a good press, and now what we need to do is cut off the excess batting. And we've got two ways we could do that. We could carefully do it with scissors, and what I do is I will just place them under the batting and cut as close as I can to the topper, just making sure I'm not cutting the backing fabric. And what you can do is lift it up and just check every time before you cut. It's a little bit nerve-wracking, but so long as you check, you should be fine. And then the second way we could do it is we could take the backing, fold it underneath, making sure it's completely out of the way. And this is where it's important that you didn't sew too far down to the edge. And then you could use your ruler and your cutter to cut it. What I like to do, what I've found, is just cut it first with the scissors, and then I like to trim it off with my rotary cutter and ruler. Or what we could do is just fold it under and then just do it with the scissors. Just do whatever you're most comfortable with. It is a little bit nerve-wracking. So once we've cut the excess batting off, we're just going to cut the excess backing off by 1 inch from the edge of our topper here. So I'm just going to take my ruler, line it up on 1 inch. So I'm going to cut it 1 inch away from the edge. Just like that on all 4 sides. And then when we've cut all the excess batting off and we've cut the backing, so we have a 1 inch border going all the way around, now we're going to quickly press. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the edge of the backing and fold it over to meet the edge of the topper. Give that a finger press and then press it. And then I'm going to fold it over again so it goes over onto the top of my topper, creating my binding, and then give it a press again. Then I'm going to pop some pins in to keep it in place. Then when I come to the corner, I'm going to take this edge, fold it over to meet the edge of this side of the topper. and I'll give that a press. Then I'm going to fold this backing over to meet the edge of the topper again, just like we did on the other side. Press. And then fold it over to create our binding. And then I'll give that a press. And I'll pin that in place. And you can see I've got a really nice mitered corner here. And then I'm going to do the same for all 4 sides and do all the corners just like this until I'm finished. So now I'm going to sew around the edge about 1/8 of an inch off from the edge of the binding. I've got my walking foot on. I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2.5. I'm just going to pop my needle down to check that I am happy where it is, and I've worked out that my guide will be the edge of my foot here, and I did move my needle in a little bit just so it's exactly where I want mine to be. So maybe you have to have a little play around with your sewing machine to get it exactly how you want it. I will stitch a couple of stitches and then do a back stitch. And now I'm just going to go all the way around the edge and going nice and slow around these corners. And I'm coming right up to my mitered corner. Just move that pin out of the way, leaving my needle down, lifting my foot up and turning. Doing my best guess, and that was about right, and continuing on. Okay everyone, I hope you enjoyed my full pumpkin table runner. Don't forget my pattern is just a guideline. You could make it however long you want. You could add on pumpkins if you wanted it slightly longer. You could just add on a few of the lighter columns on either side. You could do whatever you want. Now I also made a placemat using exactly the same pattern, except I added on 2 columns of the lighter fabrics on either side, so this side and this side. And then I added a light row at the top and a light row at the bottom. And then I thought it was a bit wide, so I cut 3/4 of an inch off the top and the bottom, and I think the size turned out perfectly. I also thought you could make a pot holder by just doing the pumpkin itself. I think the pattern is really versatile and I hope you have a lot of fun with it. If you've enjoyed today's tutorial, please make sure you subscribe and hit the bell button so you get notifications. And if you've got any ideas for future projects, please leave them in the comments. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for watching my videos. If you're enjoying them, please like, subscribe and leave a comment.